Hi students, welcome to APUSH Period 6 review. As you can see, this is my new filming studio. I got moved out of my original locations, but you know what? This works out just fine. So when we're talking about Period 6, we're really talking about 1865 to somewhere like around 1898. So it's going to be this back half of the 1800s, in which Mark Twain had coined this time the Gilded Age. He writes a book about, the Gilded Age and whatnot. And really, what he's talking about this Gilded Age is this time of gold and wealth and a rise of industrialization that's going to be occurring during this time. And a lot of these reasons why there's going to be this industrialization, some technological improvements have just happened. Henry Bessemer creates this Bessemer process in which he's able to create steel. You also have a lot of energy resources at this time. Coal and oil are going to be very big. These fossil fuels, they're all big businesses during this Gilded Age industrial revolution. Say whatever you want to say about it. And when you're talking about steel, you're talking about Andrew Carnegie, who actually was an immigrant, came over here very poor. It's a rags to riches story. And then when you're talking about oil, your main industrialization guy is going to be Rockefeller, John Rockefeller. And both of them are going to be your leading industrialization individuals during this Gilded Age. Now, each one of them is going to have different business practices. For example, Andrew Carnegie uses vertical integration, whereas Rockefeller uses horizontal integration. And what we're talking about vertical and horizontal, vertical just means you are owning all of the pieces of that industry till you make the final product. So you own, in this case, if you're talking about Carnegie, you're owning all the factories, all the transportation, all of the steel processing plants, every single part that makes the steel sell, you own it, so then you don't have to pay anybody else because you own that product. You own the whole entire process. When we're talking about horizontal integration, Rockefeller would own every single finished product or oil company. He would probably keep it the same name of whatever it was so people didn't think that Rockefeller owned it, but everything was coming to him. So, vertical, you're building the product up. Horizontal, you are just laying it all out. Pretty much, you're buying all that finished product. Usually in class, I use you own all of the shoes. You own, every single product of shoes, but you're keeping it the same name. Or soda companies. Whereas vertical, I usually use a fast food restaurant where you own the farm, you own the cow, you own the slaughterhouse, you own all the transportation, you own the ketchup for the French fries, you own the potato farm. So that's usually how I just explain it in class. So it's just kind of a review, at least, for all of you. So that is your vertical versus your horizontal integration. Now, these individuals kind of had two different names depending on your point of view. Some people will call them the captains of industry because they really did, create a lot of jobs, industrialization. In fact, Andrew Carnegie even says that there should be a social gospel in which people should give back their wealth, to individuals through charities. So a lot of these captains of industry, if we're looking at it from the positive, would give back, to different places. This is where Andrew Carnegie has Carnegie Mellon School and Carnegie Hall, and then there's Rockefeller, did a bunch of other charity stuff. And some of your other, industrialization individuals like Cornelius Vanderbilt creates Vanderbilt University. So you are having a lot of these individuals give back to society. And then other people are going to call them robber barons. So you're going to have this argument, captains of industry, or are they robber barons? And why some people said that they were robber barons is because they sometimes would buy out small businesses. Your ma and pa stores would then be completely gone. They were creating monopolies. They didn't exactly have the best working conditions in their factories. They would bribe Congress to make sure that antitrust laws didn't exactly affect them. So you can see that there was some business corruption, so to speak, but a lot of the individuals, a lot of these captains of industry, robber barons, whatever you want to call them, believed in social Darwinism, this idea of survival of the fittest, that if you want to become rich, you need to do it and you can't let anyone else pretty much help you out. Some other people, Mark Hanna is another one of these industrial robber barons, captains of industry, J.P. Morgan, Philip Armour. I'm just kind of naming a few of these extra individuals. R.H. Macy, Wanamaker. So all those individuals were considered to be industrialization or captains of industry, robber barons, say whatever you want to say. And they really did believe in this idea that the government should have laissez-faire or hands off or leave us alone type of regulations when coming to the government. And one thing that really is starting to push towards the late 1800s is this idea of imperialism, which we're going to be talking about in period 7. And we did briefly talk about it when United States was starting to open up trade with Japan. These captains of industry, wanted to open up, to other markets, and this was a way for them to try to bring about, new industry in other foreign places. So you're going to see by 1898, which is going to be where the Spanish-American War is going to be coming in, these individuals are like, yes, let's go and imperialize. Yes, let's go to, Japan, open up trade in China. Hawaii sounds like a great deal for them. So imperialism is going to be one of these factors that will continue to keep industrialization alive during this time. Now, the government is going to be involved in a few different ways. There's going to be Wabash versus Illinois, which was in 1886, in which the Supreme Court actually limited states from regulating railroad trade. The federal government then in 1887 will create the Interstate Commerce Commission, in which this organization or this group would make sure that everything was going well between trade between two states. By 1890, the United States government passes the Sherman Antitrust Act, in which then they were trying to identify and eliminate monopolies and trusts to make sure that there is fair competition within all these industries. Now, another aspect that's coming into play during this time is this influx of new immigrants into the United States. So we're talking now about southeastern immigrants from Europe, southeastern European immigrants, and immigrants from Asia, specifically China. So when we're talking about southeastern immigrants, we're talking about Russia, Greece, Italy, those areas. So Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans coming into the United States. Before, in one of the earlier periods, period 4 and period 5, we had talked about a lot of old immigrants coming into the United States, specifically Irish and German. So this is a new change. And what these individuals were doing, and what individuals I'm talking about, these robber barons, these captains of industry, is that they were bringing in immigrants into the workforce, in which then is going to create another nativism movement, in which a lot of Americans are against immigrants because they are taking jobs and they're lowering wages because these immigrants are willing to accept these lower wages. Other people that were taking advantage of them are going to be political machines that are going to be starting to form in these cities during the late 1800s. One of your most famous political machines is going to be in New York City, Tammany Hall, or the Tammany Ring, led by Boss Tweed, in which they took advantage of these immigrants, brought them in, gave them a home, gave them a job, and pretty much said, now you got to vote for us. In which then Boss Tweed would use his continued, elections to keep on getting in, to have corruption and to bring in more money for himself while stealing money from taxpayers. And that all kind of comes in with this Gilded Age as well. in which then you're going to see a lot of political scandals are going to be happening, and which the executive branch, the President of the United States, is going to be much weaker than Congress. So Congress is going to have more power in the United States than the President of the United States. Okay, Grant is your first president, kind of in this defined Gilded Age, in which he has two major scandals: the whiskey ring and the Credit Mobilier scandal, in which his cabinet was just going out and doing whatever they wanted to do. And Grant kind of didn't really care too much about it because his popularity was still so high. People liked him because of what he did during the Civil War. Hayes, a very weak president in this case, just because you're seeing these aspects of the Compromise of 1877, which ends Reconstruction. Garfield is assassinated before he could even do anything. In fact, one of the main reasons why James Garfield was actually assassinated is because there was this stalwart group of Republicans that kind of wanted people to have the spoil system. Because I know you, I'm going to get a government job. In which Garfield was like, no, I don't do that. I only do the merit system. So his vice president, Chester A. Arthur, who was a stalwart, passes the Pendleton Act, in which creates these civil service exams and promotions by merit. So you're seeing that a lot of these executive, branch individuals, these presidents of the United States, are definitely weaker compared to Congress, because Congress is also the ones that are being bribed by big businesses. Getting back to the immigrants, you are going to have some people to promote, safety of immigration. For example, one of your big reformers is going to be Jane Addams and the Hull House, in which then she was trying to help immigrants at least get a better life, and at least having a better chance of trying to improve things. And the thing is, when working conditions weren't exactly the best, like we had talked about, you're going to start to see a rise of labor unions and strikes. And two of your more famous labor unions are going to be the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, in which then your four major strikes that go on during this time, and these are your major ones that AP exams would probably bring up: the railroad strikes of 1877, the Haymarket Square riot, which they're striking, and it was peaceful, but then it turns violent with a bomb exploding, in which now people start associating strikes with terrorism. Then you have your Homestead strike, that's in right outside Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, in which then Carnegie actually there's an all-out gun battle going on between the Pinkertons and Scabs, and the workers all getting all upset over what's happening with that strike. And then the Pullman strike. Okay, and the Pullman strike was actually the one that probably got the most press, that people were starting to realize, why are these people still striking? What is going on? In which the Supreme Court said that yes, the United States government probably should start getting involved with strikes if they start to become violent or they're starting to shut down work. Another major group is Coxey's Army, in which Coxey's Army kind of marched on Washington, D.C. and was like, look, we're disgruntled workers here. We need the United States government to actually do something. Socialism starts to be talked about as an idea, that maybe socialism, this idea of where everyone is equal and the working classes have the same equality as the business owners, and that there's going to be more shared money together, that starts to be talked about as well. So all of these things in the North just continue to really bring about this idea of equality in the workplace. Even though the working conditions were declining in these areas, that doesn't mean that everything was being a negative connotation towards the industrialization or industrial revolution, whatever you want, Gilded Age, this whole period six. There is going to be a rise of the middle class. And with the rise of the middle class, you're also going to see a rise of leisure activities. One of the most watched sports of the time is going to be baseball. Okay, so baseball is going to be on the rise during this time, like other leisure activities. People were, going to parks, and parks were going to be a brand new built thing. Central Park is being built at this time by Frederick Law Olmsted. So these are just some of the few of these leisure activities at this time. And I had mentioned earlier about these rags to riches. The main person that created this idea of rags to riches is going to be a writer named Horatio Alger Jr. And he writes a book called Ragged Dick, in which the character of the story was poor, worked his way up the ladder, and became rich at the very end. So this kind of leads back into that whole social Darwinism. And really, our main rags to rich real life character is going to be Andrew Carnegie. And this period 6 is really split up into 3 different parts. It's the North, the South, and the West. So the second aspect we'll talk about is the South, or what they're calling themselves the New South. And why they call themselves the New South, it was these idea, or at least the idea, that the South would industrialize, trying to move away from agrarian society so that they would become new. It doesn't really happen. Atlanta does get a lot of factories, but other than that, agrarian society, sharecropping is probably going to be one of the most important aspects of Southern economic life. There's segregation still around your Jim Crow laws. The KKK is still on a rise. However, though, there's going to be a court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, in which is going to be one of the last civil rights cases that you're going to have until you get into the 1950s. And what this court case was Homer Plessy was part African American, and he, with the help of the NAACP, were trying to challenge the Jim Crow laws in the South, in which he rides in the whites only section of a railroad and will be arrested for violating, Jim Crow laws, in which then they bring it up into the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court stated that segregation was legal as long as it was equal between both areas. So this is where we get separate but equal. Now, there's going to be loopholes about this, because now it's going to be Southerners that are like, well, what is our definition of equal? Is our definition of equal that we are giving them the opportunity, whatever it is, but the condition may be bad? So, for example, we can say that, yes, look, there are 2 different water fountains, but they're both working, but one has filtered water and the other doesn't. It's still equal because there's both water coming out of the water fountain. So that was the loophole, or at least that was the way of thinking that many Southerners were doing. And because of this, you're going to see these exodusters, and it's going to be African American farmers that are going to move from the South to go migrate towards the West to try to escape racism, but also to try to get some of the land, some of the resources that are out in the West. And if you look at the root word of exodusters, it's exodus, and exodus means to leave. So it's pretty easy to remember this idea of exodusters, kind of moving out. Now, there's going to be 2 civil rights activists that are going to be speaking about, at least at this time, of what African Americans should do to better themselves. Booker T. Washington was trying to promote the idea that vocational training and education is definitely the answer, because if you're educated and you own your own business, then you can make your own rules. On the other side, W.E.B. Du Bois, who's going to be discussing the ideas behind that. Education is good, but you need to go a step further and also be an activist as well. So this is where you have your 2, sides. Is it just education, or is it, education is good too, but let's go out there and be an activist? So really, the New South is the same exact South that we've already had before. It's just giving itself a new name, but still the same product. And on to the West, which is our final part of period 6. So with the West, you're going to have the beginnings of a Greenback Party. And the Greenback Party was just trying to increase the money supply that was going on. It doesn't really take that much... it doesn't really get that much steam or that much traction to make a political statement. But your farmers are going to unite. First, they unite through this Grange movement, in which all they really wanted was government regulations and banking and railroads. And a lot of reasons why is because farmers had a lot of debts. So they were trying to make sure that these other big institutions weren't taking advantage of them. The Farmers Alliance had very similar ideas, and eventually they're going to join together and they're going to evolve into a populist party. And what the Populist Party pretty much stood for was a government regulation, like we said, on these big businesses that are going to affect and protect farmers' interests in this case. So they're trying to protect farmers' interests. Plus, they were also big on this idea called bimetallism. And this idea was having gold and silver into the money supply. And the reason why they wanted to do this is because if they raised the money supply, this would devalue money, causing inflation of prices, and it would also, cause salaries to go up. At the same time, though, the something that stays the same are farmers' debts. So this bimetallism would be an easier way for farmers to pay off their debts. The Populist Party kind of starts to be ingrained into the Democratic Party by 1896 when William Jennings Bryan runs for president. He's a congressman from Nebraska, and he picks up these populist ideas and he gives this cross of gold speech in which he starts promoting bimetallism and all these populist ideas. He'll be running up against a big business type of guy in William McKinley, who's from Ohio, and McKinley's going to win. In fact, William Jennings Bryan, very much like Henry Clay, a big popular figure in American politics, but never wins the presidency of the United States. William Jennings Bryan is going to run again in 1900. McKinley's going to beat him again. William Jennings Bryan runs up against Taft in 1908, and Taft will beat William Jennings Bryan. So, William Jennings Bryan just keeps on losing. It's unfortunate for him just because he'll never become president, but he just keeps on, losing in this case. So in this, with him losing, this is pretty much saying that the majority of America is not accepting of these ideas of this bimetallism, these farmers' rights, all about big businesses. So kind of keep that in mind, at least from that aspect of it. Now, like we had already said, westward expansion is going to be happening with the help of railroads. And the three major industries that a lot of Westerners are going to be engaged in is going to be ranching, mining, and farming. So those are going to be the main industries of the West. What's happening is because we talked about an influx of immigrants that were coming in. We said the new immigrants were coming into the East, your Southeastern Europeans. We said that Asians, specifically the Chinese, were coming into the West. Well, a law is going to be passed. Once again, we're talking about nativism, the Chinese Exclusion Act, in which for 10 years the Chinese are going to be excluded from these ideas of, or not the ideas, but excluded from the United States from immigrating into here, unless you're like a school teacher or you're on, vacation, things like that, because the United States still wants, money to come in. When we're talking about Native Americans, there's a lot of different laws that are going to be coming into play. And with the ranching, the buffalo starts to decline as well. This Western idea that we think of the American buffalo, they start to die out from, this westward expansion. It's just one of these results. But with the Native Americans, we had already talked about, Sand Creek Massacre. Wounded Knee is going to be another Native American defeat as well. But reservations start to grow. This reservation system of the United States putting these Native American groups into specific areas that can be designated just for them, that the United States won't touch anymore. And usually it's not the best piece of land. It's just something to give to the Native Americans, in which then the government can be like, look, we did something, now we can keep on moving on. Now there's going to be different things that are going to be happening, though. Helen Hunt Jackson writes the book, Century of Dishonor, in which she was talking about how the government had treated these Native Americans so badly. And the United States government then passes the Dawes Act, in which then they're trying to get Native Americans to assimilate into American culture. So overall, still the United States is still treating Native Americans, as foreigners and trying to bring them into accepting this idea of American culture. And back then, United States was saying, yes, we're like a melting pot. Okay, we're gonna get everybody, to pretty much go into this one thing of being American. But we all know that looking back into different people's ethnic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds and all these ethnic differences, yeah, we may be American, but we still have the backgrounds of our ancestors. Well, thank you for watching APUSH Period 6, this brief overview. Please make sure that you subscribe so then you can get more of these as they keep on popping up to try to help you for your United States history classes. You can also sign up for the playlist so that you can keep on watching more of these. I also have an AP European one in case you are taking European history. Other than that, till next time, keep on studying, and I hope you get a 5 on your test.